Wars kill millions. Microbes kill empires. Think about that for a moment. Every general you have ever heard of, every emperor whose face you have seen on a coin, every conqueror who burned a city to the ground, combined, all of them together, across all of recorded human history, have killed fewer people than a handful of organisms so small you cannot see them without a lens that did not exist for most of human existence. Alexander the Great died at 32. Some historians believe a microbe killed him. Genghis Khan built the largest contiguous empire in history. A microbe stopped his grandson's cold in the forests of Eastern Europe. Napoleon marched into Russia with 600,000 men. Typhus killed more of them than the Russian winter and the Russian army combined. But this episode is not about those microbes. It is about 11 different ones. 11 outbreaks that did not just kill people, they rewrote civilization. My name is Mortimer Quill. I am the keeper of the archive, the place where history goes when official history refuses to look at it. And tonight, I am going to take you down into a part of the archive most visitors never see. The basement. The locked corridor. The medical cabinet at the end of the hall. The one with the glass doors and the iron padlock that has not been opened in a very long time. Inside that cabinet are 11 glass jars. Each one is sealed. Each one has a label. Each one contains a story that should make you afraid of how thin the membrane is between civilization and collapse. I am going to take them out, one by one, and I'm going to rank them. Not by how many people they killed, though we will count the bodies. I am going to rank them by something more disturbing, by depth of damage, by how deep into the bones of human civilization each one cut. The first 10 you may have heard of. Some of them you definitely have. Bubonic plague, Spanish flu, smallpox, AIDS. The 11th, the one I'm going to put on top of the shelf at the end, the one Quill says is the worst of them all. Most of you have never been told about in school. It killed perhaps 100,000 people. That is nothing compared to the others, a rounding error. But it may have stolen something from humanity that we can never get back. Are you ready? Good. Take this. It is a small glass test tube, empty. Hold on to it. You will understand why at the end. Now follow me down. The first jar I am pulling off the shelf is labeled in Latin. The handwriting is faded. The glass is old and slightly green. The label reads, Pestis Antonina, the Antonine Plague. The year is 165 of the Common Era. The Roman Empire is at its height. Marcus Aurelius rules from the imperial palace. The legions are stretched from the cold mists of Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia. Rome believes it is eternal. Rome believes it is the natural order of the world. Rome is wrong. In the east, a Roman army under the co-emperor Lucius Verus is finishing a campaign against the Parthian Empire. They have sacked the city of Seleucia on the Tigris. They are loaded with treasure and prisoners. They are coming home heroes. They do not know that they are also bringing something with them. Something that boarded their ships and walked with them along the roads. A physician in Rome named Galen of Pergamon, perhaps the most famous doctor of antiquity, begins to receive patients with strange symptoms. A high fever that will not break, a dry, cracking cough, black pustules that erupt across the skin and ooze a foul fluid. The eyes turn red, the throat closes. Patients die in agony, often within 9 days. Galen flees Rome. He returns later and writes about what he saw. From his descriptions, modern epidemiologists believe this was almost certainly smallpox, a strain that had likely never reached the Mediterranean before. The Roman population had no immunity whatsoever. And here is where the numbers stop being numbers and start being a civilization breaking. For the next 15 years, the Antonine Plague spreads from one end of the empire to the other. It returns in waves. It kills in the cities. It kills in the countryside. It kills in the army. Entire legions are reduced to skeleton crews. Cassius Dio, the historian, claims that at the worst of it, 2,000 people were dying every single day in the city of Rome alone. The total death toll? Modern estimates range from 5 million to 10 million people. In an empire of perhaps 75 million, that is one death in every 15, or worse. But here is what matters. The plague does not just kill bodies, it kills systems. The legions are too thin to defend the borders. Marcus Aurelius spends most of his reign on the Danube frontier, trying to hold back Germanic tribes that smell weakness for the first time in 2 centuries. The economy contracts, tax revenues fall. Trade with India and China, the Silk Road traffic that brought the plague in the first place, collapses because no one wants to send caravans through dying cities. Marcus Aurelius himself, the philosopher-emperor, is believed by some scholars to have died of the plague in 180. His death marks the end of the era historians call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. After him comes his son, Commodus, who is, to put it gently, not the man his father was. The empire begins its long, ugly slide. The Antonine Plague did not destroy Rome. Rome would limp on for another 3 centuries in the west, longer in the east. But the plague snapped something. It broke the spine of confidence. It thinned the population at exactly the moment Rome needed every soldier, every farmer, every taxpayer. Galen survived. He died in his 80s, full of honors. The legions he treated did not. I am setting this jar down on the table. 5 to 10 million dead. The first crack in the marble of the eternal empire. The second jar is heavier. The label is in Greek. Loimos Justinianu, the plague of Justinian. The year is 541. The place is the Egyptian port city of Pelusium on the Nile Delta. Ships are being loaded with grain, Egyptian grain, the breadbasket that has fed the Mediterranean for 2,000 years. The grain is going north, to Constantinople, to the capital of what we now call the Byzantine Empire, the surviving eastern half of Rome. The grain is full of rats. The rats are full of fleas. The fleas are full of Yersinia pestis, bubonic plague. This is the first recorded appearance of the Black Death bacterium in human history. 600 years before it would return and earn its more famous name, it strikes Constantinople with the force of an asteroid impact. The emperor on the throne is Justinian I. He is a man with enormous ambitions. He has just spent 20 years and a fortune trying to do something no one has done since the empire split: reconquer the Western Roman provinces. His general Belisarius has retaken North Africa from the Vandals. He has retaken Italy from the Ostrogoths. He has set his sights on Spain. The dream is to put the Roman Empire back together, to make it whole again, to restore what was lost. Then the ships from Pelusium dock at the Golden Horn. The historian Procopius of Caesarea is in the city. He is Justinian's official chronicler. He has written about the wars, about the architecture, about Hagia Sophia rising into the sky. Now he writes something different. He writes a book later called The Secret History, and in his official histories, he describes what he is seeing. The disease begins, he writes, with a fever so mild that no one takes it seriously. People go about their day. Then, on the 2nd or 3rd day, the swellings appear. In the groin, in the armpits, behind the ears. Hard, painful lumps the size of an apple or larger. The Greeks call them bubones, the buboes. This is where the word bubonic comes from. After the swellings, the fever spikes. Some patients fall into a coma and never wake up. Others go mad with delirium. Some develop black blisters across the body, which Procopius believed marked the worst cases. Those patients almost always died within a day. The bodies pile up faster than the city can bury them. At its peak, Procopius claims, the plague of Justinian was killing 10,000 people every day in Constantinople alone. Modern historians think that number may be exaggerated, but only by a little. The city, which had perhaps 500,000 inhabitants, lost between 20 and 40% of its population in a single summer. Justinian himself caught the plague. Astonishingly, he survived. Most of his court did not. The plague spread outward. It hit Antioch. It hit Alexandria. It hit Rome. It hit the new Germanic kingdoms in Gaul and Iberia. It hit Persia. For 2 centuries, in waves, it kept coming back. The total death toll across the first century of outbreaks is estimated by some scholars at 25 to 50 million people. And the dream of restoring the Roman Empire? It died with them. Justinian's reconquests, which had been so brilliant and so expensive, could not be held. There were not enough soldiers. There were not enough taxpayers. Within a generation of his death, most of Italy was lost again. Within a century, a new force would rise out of the Arabian desert, the armies of Islam, and they would take North Africa, Egypt, Syria, and most of what was left of the Roman world. They would do it partly because the empires they were attacking had been hollowed out by the plague. Edward Gibbon, writing in the 18th century, blamed Christianity for the fall of Rome. Modern historians increasingly point a different finger. The bacteria in those grain ships did more damage in 18 months than every barbarian invasion combined. Procopius lived to write it down. The empire he served never came back. I set the second jar next to the first. 25 to 50 million dead. The Roman dream dead with them. The third jar. Now we are getting to the one you know. The label reads Mors Nigra, the Black Death. The year is 1346. The place is the Crimean port of Kaffa, a Genoese trading colony on the northern shore of the Black Sea. And what is happening at Kaffa is straight out of a horror film. A Mongol army under Khan Janibeg is besieging the Genoese walls. They have been sitting outside the city for months. They are hungry, they are tired, and they are sick. A plague is ripping through the Mongol camp, killing soldiers by the hundreds every day. So Janibeg makes a decision that, according to a notary named Gabriele de Musi, becomes one of the first recorded acts of biological warfare in human history. He orders his men to load the corpses of plague victims onto catapults, and he hurls them, broken and bloated and oozing, over the walls into the city. The Genoese throw the bodies into the sea, but it is too late. The fleas have already jumped. The disease is inside the walls. A few survivors flee Kaffa on a galley. They sail west. They stop in Constantinople. They stop in Messina, in Sicily. They stop in Genoa. They stop in Marseille. Every port they touch becomes an ignition point. What follows is the closest thing humanity has ever come to civilizational extinction. In 4 years, from 1347 to 1351, the Black Death kills between 30 and 60% of the entire population of Europe. Let those numbers settle in your stomach. Not 30% of one city, 30 to 60% of an entire continent. Some regions lose 3 out of every 4 people. Whole villages disappear and never get repopulated. The bones of those villages are still under English farmland today. Archaeologists call them deserted medieval villages, and there are thousands of them. The symptoms are the same as in Justinian's plague: buboes, fever, black blisters. But there is a second form, even more terrifying: pneumonic plague. The bacterium gets into the lungs. It spreads through the air. A man can be healthy in the morning and a corpse by sundown. The chronicler, Agnolo di Tura, writes from Siena, quote, _0 __. He buries them with his own hands. 5. Because no gravediggers are left. The total death toll across Europe, Asia, and North Africa is estimated at 75 to 200 million people. It is the largest single mortality event in human history. And the depth of damage? My friends, this is where the third jar earns its place high on the shelf. The Black Death does not just kill people. It breaks the entire social order of the Middle Ages. Before the plague, you have feudalism. Land is owned by lords. Peasants are bound to that land by birth. They cannot leave. They cannot bargain. They work for almost nothing because there are too many of them and not enough land. The church teaches them this is God's order. Kings enforce it with the sword. After the plague, the equation flips. Suddenly, there are not enough peasants. The survivors realize something dangerous. They realize their labor is now valuable. A peasant in 1400 can walk off his lord's manor and find another lord 20 miles away who will pay him 3 times the old wage just to plow his fields. Wages explode. Lords panic. Governments panic. England passes the Statute of Laborers in 1351, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. It does not work. The peasants ignore it. When the lords push back, the peasants revolt. Wat Tyler's rebellion in 1381, the Jacquerie in France, the Ciompi uprising in Florence. Feudalism, as a working economic system, dies in the years after the Black Death. It does not collapse all at once. It bleeds out for 2 centuries. But the moment the bacterium killed enough peasants to make the survivors irreplaceable, the medieval world was over. Something else dies too: faith in the church. The church promised protection. The church promised that prayer, that pilgrimage, that the right relics and the right rituals would keep you safe. The plague did not care. It killed pious nuns and corrupt cardinals at exactly the same rate. It killed entire monasteries. The Pope himself, Clement VI in Avignon, survived only because his physician made him sit between 2 enormous fires day and night, which incidentally killed the fleas. When ordinary people watched the priest who blessed them on Sunday die screaming with buboes in his armpits on Tuesday, something cracked. The crack would widen for the next 170 years. And in 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther would walk up to a church door in Wittenberg and hammer the crack wide open. The Reformation. The end of medieval Christendom. The wars of religion. The fracturing of Europe. None of it happens, or it happens very differently, without the Black Death first hollowing out the moral authority of the medieval church. Modernity, ladies and gentlemen, was midwifed by a bacterium. I set the 3rd jar on the table. 75 to 200 million dead. Feudalism dead. The medieval church mortally wounded. The 4th jar. The label is shorter, just 1 word. Variola. Smallpox. And a date. 1520. The place is the city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. A floating metropolis built on islands in Lake Texcoco, with causeways and aqueducts and pyramids that towered above what is now Mexico City. 300,000 inhabitants, possibly more. Larger than any city in Spain at the time. Larger than London. Larger than Paris. A Spanish conquistador named Hernán Cortés has just been driven out of the city in a humiliating defeat called La Noche Triste, the Sad Night. He has lost most of his men, most of his horses, and all the gold he had stolen. He is licking his wounds in Tlaxcala, plotting his return. He does not need to plot very hard, because while he is gone, something else is doing his work for him. A single sick African slave traveling with a Spanish reinforcement column under Panfilo de Narvaez has brought smallpox into the New World. The virus jumps from him to the indigenous porters and slaves, from them to villages, from villages to the lake cities. The Aztecs have never seen this disease. No one in the Americas has. There is no immunity, not even partial immunity. When smallpox lands in a population that has never encountered it before, the mortality rate is not the 10 or 20% of European outbreaks. It can climb to 90%. Tenochtitlan, in the autumn of 1520, becomes a charnel house. A Franciscan friar named Bernardino de Sahagún, who arrives a few years later and interviews survivors, will eventually compile their testimony. The Aztecs called the disease Huezahuatl, the Great Rash. They describe sores so thick on the body that the dying could not turn over without screaming. They describe families starving to death, not because there was no food, but because no one was strong enough to cook it. They describe the smell. They describe stepping over corpses in the streets because there was no one left to carry them away. The new emperor of the Aztecs, Cuitlahuac, the man who had led the army that drove Cortés out of the city, the man who should have been the second Aztec leader to crush the Spanish invasion, Cuitlahuac dies of smallpox 60 days after taking the throne. 60 days. He is succeeded by a teenage cousin, Cuauhtémoc, who inherits a city of half-buried corpses and starving survivors. When Cortés returns in 1521 with reinforcements and indigenous allies, the great Tenochtitlan that drove him out a year earlier no longer exists. He is conquering a graveyard. But Tenochtitlan is just the beginning. Smallpox runs ahead of the Spanish like a brush fire. It crosses Central America. It crosses the Andes. It reaches the Inca Empire years before any Spanish soldier sets foot there. The Inca Emperor Huayna Capac dies of it in 1524, almost a decade before Pizarro arrives. His son and heir dies of it. The Inca succession collapses into civil war between two surviving sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa. By the time Pizarro lands in Peru in 1532, with 168 men and 27 horses, the largest empire in the Americas has just finished tearing itself apart. That is how 168 men conquer 10 million people. Smallpox got there first. Across both American continents over the next century, the indigenous population collapses by an estimated 80 to 95%. From perhaps 60 million people in 1492 down to 5 or 6 million by 1650. It is the largest demographic catastrophe in recorded history. It empties continents. It opens the land for colonial settlement on a scale that would have been impossible against full populations. Every farm in the Midwestern United States, every plantation in Brazil, every ranch in Argentina, all of it sits on land that was emptied by viruses 2 centuries before any settler arrived. The Columbian exchange of microbes was a bigger conqueror than any conquistador. Cortés got the statue. Smallpox got the continent. I set the 4th jar on the table. 56 million dead in the Americas alone. 2 civilizations erased. A hemisphere repopulated. The 5th jar. You have probably never heard of this one. The label reads Cocolisli. The word means pestilence in Nahuatl, and what is in this jar terrifies modern epidemiologists, because 480 years later, we still cannot agree on what it actually was. The year is 1545. The place is central Mexico. Smallpox has already done its work. The Aztec population has already been reduced from perhaps 25 million to about 6 million. The colonial Spanish system is being built on the ruins, and then, in August of 1545, something new starts killing the survivors. Spanish doctors describe it. So do the indigenous healers. The symptoms are unlike anything they have seen. High fever, severe headaches, black tongue, dark urine, vertigo. Then, the truly horrifying part. Bleeding. From the nose, from the eyes, from the mouth. Patients die in 3 to 4 days, drowning in their own blood. In 2 outbreaks, 1545 and 1576, the Cocolisli kills perhaps 15 million people. The Mexican population, already shattered, drops by another 80% in some regions. By 1600, what had once been the most densely populated part of the New World is a depopulated wasteland. For 400 years, no one knew what Cocolisli was. Not smallpox, not measles, not typhus. The symptoms did not match anything in the European medical lexicon. In 2018, a team of researchers at the Max Planck Institute extracted ancient DNA from the teeth of victims buried in a colonial-era cemetery in Oaxaca. They found something unexpected: Salmonella enterica paratyphi C, a strain of typhoid fever that, on a malnourished, traumatized, immunologically devastated population, became something far worse than typhoid usually is. The Spanish brought it. The Spanish never got sick from it. Their bodies had grown up around it. The bodies of the people of central Mexico had not. Cocolisli is not the most famous plague in this cabinet. But it earns its place because of what it tells us. It tells us that conquest is not just about armies and steel. It is about the invisible world that travels with armies. Long after the conquerors have gone home, their microbes keep killing. I set the fifth jar on the table. 15 million dead. A civilization that survived smallpox, finished off by salmonella. The sixth jar, cholera. Vibrio cholerae, the disease of the 19th century. The year is 1817. The place is the Sundarbans, the great tidal delta where the Ganges meets the Bay of Bengal. Cholera has lived in these brackish waters, probably for thousands of years, infecting only local populations who had built up some resistance to it. Then the British East India Company comes. British military movements, British trade routes, British shipping, the entire infrastructure of the new global empire picks up the cholera bacterium and carries it out of the delta and into the world. Within a decade, it has reached Russia. Within 15 years, it has reached London and Paris and New York. Within 30 years, it has reached Tokyo and Buenos Aires. Cholera is the first truly global pandemic of the industrial age, and what it kills, more than people, is the illusion that European cities are clean. In 1854, in the Soho district of London, a physician named John Snow does something no one has done before. There is a cholera outbreak around Broad Street. People are dying within hours of getting sick. Uncontrollable diarrhea, severe dehydration, death by collapse of the circulatory system. The medical establishment believes cholera is caused by miasma, bad air rising from filth. Snow does not believe this. He walks the neighborhood, he maps the deaths, and he notices something. Every dead body clusters around one particular water pump on Broad Street. Houses on streets with different pumps are barely affected. He convinces the local Veen major, pandemics over the 19th and 20th centuries kills tens of millions of people, but its real legacy is what it forced cities to do. Sewers, clean water, public health departments, sanitation engineering. The entire modern apparatus that allows you to drink from your tap without dying, every bit of it was built because cholera made governments build it. I set the sixth jar on the table. Tens of millions dead, the first global pandemic, the birth of public health. The seventh jar, the Russian flu, 1889. This is the dark horse of the cabinet. Most people have never heard of it, but it is important because of what it represents. The first pandemic of the railway age, and possibly the first influenza pandemic that we have detailed clinical records for. It begins in Bukhara, in what is now Uzbekistan, in the spring of 1889. From there, it follows the new railway lines, to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, to Berlin, to Paris, to London, to New York. The world is connected by steam and steel for the first time in human history, and the virus uses every kilometer of track. Within 4 months, it has circled the globe. Within a year, it has killed perhaps 1 million people. That is a low number compared to the others in this cabinet. So why does it earn its jar? Because of two things. First, it taught the medical world that pandemics could now move at industrial speed. The old plagues took years to cross continents. The Russian flu did it in weeks. Every pandemic since, every single one, has been faster. Second, recent research suggests the Russian flu may not have been an influenza at all. It may have been a coronavirus. Specifically, the ancestor of OC43, one of the 4 common cold coronaviruses that circulate today. If that is true, then we have just watched a deadly, novel coronavirus enter the human population, kill 1 million people, and then settle down into a routine respiratory infection that we no longer fear. Familiar story? It should be. I set the 7th jar on the table. 1 million dead. The first railway pandemic. Possibly a coronavirus. Learning how to live with us. The 8th jar. 1918. The Spanish flu. Except it did not start in Spain. The first recorded case in the official record is on March 11th, 1918, at Camp Funston, Kansas. An army cook named Albert Gitchell reports to the infirmary with fever and a sore throat. By noon, 100 more soldiers are sick. By the end of the week, 500. The camp doctors do not panic. It is just the flu. The boys will recover. There is a war on. Camp Funston is a staging area for American troops being shipped to France for the First World War. By April, the virus is in the trenches. By May, it is in every army on every front. By summer, it is everywhere. And then, in the autumn of 1918, it mutates. It comes back in a second wave. And the second wave is something humanity has never seen before in modern medical history. Normal influenza kills the very young and the very old. The Spanish flu killed 20-year-olds, healthy soldiers, healthy young women, people in the prime of their lives. It triggered something we now call a cytokine storm. The immune system overreacted so violently that it destroyed the lungs themselves. Patients turned blue from oxygen deprivation. They drowned in their own bodily fluids. Some died within 12 hours of feeling the first symptoms. The total death toll from the Spanish flu is estimated at between 50 and 100 million people in 2 years, worldwide. More than the First World War, more than the Second World War, more than any single event in human history except possibly the Black Death. And nobody talks about it, because the war was talked about. The war had monuments. The war had heroes. The flu had nothing. No flag to march under, no enemy to blame, no clear story. Wartime censorship in the United States, in Britain, in France, and in Germany suppressed the news. Newspapers were not allowed to report on it for fear of damaging morale. Only neutral Spain reported honestly on the outbreak, which is why the world unfairly named the disease after them. The Spanish, with bitter irony, called it the French flu. After the war ended, everyone wanted to forget. Veterans came home, cities rebuilt, the roaring 20s began. The 100 million dead disappeared from cultural memory. It took 100 years and a new pandemic to make us remember. I set the 8th jar on the table. 50 to 100 million dead, the forgotten pandemic, the one that taught us how fast a respiratory virus can hollow out a generation. The 9th jar, HIV, AIDS. The plague the world tried not to look at. In June of 1981, the United States Centers for Disease Control publishes a small notice in its weekly report. 5 young men in Los Angeles have presented with a strange form of pneumonia, pneumocystis pneumonia, a disease that normally only attacks people with severely compromised immune systems. These men have no reason to have compromised immune systems. They are young. They are previously healthy. They are all gay. That notice is the official birth certificate of the AIDS pandemic in the medical record. The actual virus had been moving through human populations for at least 70 years before that, slowly, quietly, jumping from chimpanzees in Cameroon sometime in the early 20th century, spreading through Central Africa, riding colonial roads and decolonization wars and global travel, until it surfaced in cities on 4 continents at almost the same time. Over the next 40 years, HIV will kill approximately 40 million people. It will infect another 40 million who are still alive today. It will reshape the demographics of entire African nations. Life expectancy in countries like Botswana and Zimbabwe collapsed by 20 years. A whole generation of children grew up without parents. But the depth of damage of HIV is not just in the body count. It is in what it revealed about human cruelty. For most of the 1980s, governments would not act. Because the early victims were gay men, drug users, Haitians, hemophiliacs, populations that were politically inconvenient to defend. Ronald Reagan did not say the word AIDS in public until 1985, 4 years and 12,000 American deaths after the first cases. Funding was denied. Research was delayed. Activists had to chain themselves to government buildings to be heard. People died because of who they slept with and who they were, not because the disease was untreatable, but because society decided they were not worth treating. When the antiretroviral drugs finally arrived in 1996, they worked. They were a miracle. They turned a death sentence into a chronic condition. But they were expensive, $12,000 per patient per year. And in the African countries where the pandemic was worst, pharmaceutical companies refused to lower the price. Millions of people died waiting for prices to drop. They did not drop until activists in country after country broke patent law and forced the issue. HIV is the plague that proved a modern fact. In the 21st century, who lives and who dies from a pandemic is decided as much by economics and politics as by biology. I set the 9th jar on the table. 40 million dead. The plague that exposed what we are willing to ignore. The 10th jar. Ebola, 1976. The label is written in red ink. The glass feels cold. The first known outbreak begins in a small village in northern Zaire, modern Democratic Republic of Congo, near a river called the Ebola. A school teacher named Mabalo Lokela has just returned from a trip to the north. He has a high fever. He goes to the local Catholic mission hospital in Yambuku, run by Belgian nuns. They give him an injection of anti-malarial drugs. That injection is given with a needle. The needle has been used on 5 other patients that day. The nuns reuse needles to save costs. Within 2 weeks, Mabalo is dead. Within a month, his entire family is dead. Within 2 months, 11 of the 17 hospital staff are dead. Within 3 months, 280 people are dead, including a young Congolese nurse named Mainga Nseka, whose photograph survives, a beautiful, composed young woman in her uniform who would die bleeding from her eyes. That is what Ebola does. The virus attacks the lining of the blood vessels themselves. The body, in the final stages, simply leaks. Blood from the nose, from the mouth, from the rectum, from every soft tissue. The patient is conscious for most of it. The death rate in the first Yambuku outbreak was 88%. 88 out of every 100 infected died. Ebola has only killed about 15,000 people in total across all outbreaks since 1976. By the numbers in this cabinet, it is small, trivial. But it earns its jar because of what it represents: the rehearsal pandemic, the dress rehearsal. Every Ebola outbreak, Yambuku in 76, Kikwit in 95, the catastrophic West African outbreak of 2014, Eastern Congo in 2018, has been a stress test for the global health system. A small, contained, geographically limited preview of what a more transmissible version would do. And every time, we pass the test by the skin of our teeth, or we fail it. The 2014 outbreak in Liberia and Sierra Leone and Guinea killed 11,000 people and came within a single mutation of becoming airborne. If it had become airborne, we would not be here having this conversation. Ebola is the warning shot. It is the universe whispering, this is what could happen. And then, sometimes, like in 2019, it lets us see what does happen when something else, something more contagious, finally slips through. I set the 10th jar on the table. 15,000 dead. A small number, a loaded warning. The shelf is empty now. 10 jars on the table, 10 pandemics, hundreds of millions of dead. But there is one jar I have not taken down yet. It is on the very top of the cabinet, behind a small pane of glass, behind a lock that requires a different key. The label is in Greek, faded almost to nothing. The glass is the oldest. It is older than the others by 1,000 years. Loimos ton Athenon, the plague of Athens. Why is this one on top? Why does Mortimer Quill rank a plague that killed perhaps 100,000 people above plagues that killed hundreds of millions? Sit down. Hold that empty test tube I gave you a little tighter, because this is the story they should have told you in school and never did. The year is 430 before the Common Era. The place is Athens. Not the dusty ruin of marble columns you see in tourist photographs. The living, breathing, screaming Athens at the absolute peak of its power. The Athens of Pericles, the Athens of Sophocles, of Euripides, of Phidias. The Athens that has just finished building the Parthenon. The Athens that has just invented democracy. The Athens that is, at this exact moment, the most concentrated explosion of human creative genius the world has ever seen. Athens is at war. The Peloponnesian War, a grinding, civilization-defining conflict against Sparta and her allies for the future of the Greek world. The war is in its second year. Pericles, the leader of Athens, has a strategy. He knows Athens cannot beat Sparta on land. Spartan hoplites are the most feared soldiers on earth. But Athens has a navy. Athens has the sea. Athens has the long walls connecting the city to the port of Piraeus, making the city effectively an island. So Pericles orders the entire population of Attica, every farmer, every villager, every shepherd, to abandon their lands and crowd inside the walls of the city. Let the Spartans burn the countryside. Athens will outlast them by sea. Athens will win by waiting. It is a brilliant strategy. It is also, in retrospect, a death trap. A city built for 100,000 people now contains 300,000. They are crammed into temporary shelters. They are sleeping in alleys, in temples, in the spaces between buildings. Sanitation collapses. The summer of 430 is hot. The water in the cisterns goes bad. People are weak from anxiety, from displacement, from grief over their burned farms. Then the ships arrive at Piraeus. We do not know exactly what disease they brought. 2,500 years later, we still cannot agree. Smallpox? Typhoid? Typhus? Ebola? Some unknown virus that no longer exists? Modern DNA studies of mass graves found in the Karameikos Cemetery in 1994 suggest typhoid fever, but the symptoms described by ancient sources do not perfectly match any modern disease. It may have been something the world has lost. What we do know is what it did, because, by an extraordinary stroke of luck, a young Athenian general named Thucydides caught it. And he survived, and he wrote about it. Thucydides is not just any general. He is, alongside Herodotus, the founder of Western historical writing. The man who decided that history should not be myth, should not be flattery, should not be propaganda, that history should be the cold, clear, evidence-based reconstruction of what actually happened. He is the ancestor of every honest historian who has ever lived. And in Book 2 of his History of the Peloponnesian War, he gives us the most detailed clinical description of an epidemic to survive from the ancient world. Read his words. Read them slowly. He describes how the disease began with the head, sudden burning in the eyes, redness of the throat, sneezing, hoarseness. Then it descended into the chest, violent coughing, then into the stomach, vomiting up every kind of bile that physicians had names for, then convulsions, then the skin erupted in small pustules and ulcers. The internal heat was so intense that patients could not bear to wear clothing, could not bear to lie under sheets. They wanted to throw themselves into cold water. Many ran to the public cisterns and drank until their stomachs burst. If they survived 7 or 8 days, the disease moved into the bowels. Massive, uncontrollable diarrhea. Most died at this stage from sheer exhaustion. Those who somehow survived even this often lost their fingers, their toes, their genitals, the extremities rotted off. Some lost their eyes. Some, Thucydides writes, lost their memory entirely. They survived, but did not know who they were, did not know their own families. Walked the streets as living ghosts. The death toll was somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 people. In a city of 300,000, 1 in 3 Athenians died, possibly more. But Thucydides, and this is why he is the greatest historian of antiquity, Thucydides understood that the body count was not the real story. The real story was what the plague did to the soul of Athens. Listen to him. He writes that the plague broke the laws of religion and the laws of decency at the same time. People who had been pious abandoned their prayers. The gods had clearly abandoned them, so why pray? People who had been law-abiding abandoned the law. They could be dead tomorrow, so why hold back today? Funerals became impossible because there were too many bodies. People threw their dead onto other people's funeral pyres and ran. Some pushed corpses into open mass graves. Some left bodies in the street. The wealthy and the poor died in the same numbers. So the survivors stopped saving for the future. They spent everything they had as fast as they could on whatever pleasure they could find. They reasoned very simply, there is no future. There is only today. So today is for indulgence. Athens, the Athens of philosophy, of measure, of nothing in excess, became for 2 summers a city of orgies and abandoned children and rotting, unburied dead and shrieking madness. And then Pericles died. Pericles, the architect of the strategy, the voice of Athenian moderation, the man whose face is on every coin of Athenian glory. He had given the funeral oration just a year before, perhaps the greatest speech in the entire ancient world, in which he had argued that Athens was a school for all of Greece, a city whose freedom and openness made it the model for all civilization. He had buried his 2 legitimate sons during the plague, watching them die in front of him. He himself caught the disease on the second wave in 429. He lingered. He suffered. He died. The leadership of Athens passed to his successors, and his successors were, to put it bluntly, much worse men. Cleon, Hyperbolus, demagogues, loud men who told the demos what it wanted to hear instead of what it needed to hear. Without Pericles, Athenian strategy fell apart. The democracy that he had held together with the force of his personal moderation became a screaming mob, voting for catastrophic adventures. The most catastrophic of all came 12 years later, the Sicilian expedition. Athens, against the warnings of its wiser citizens, sent an enormous fleet and army to attack Syracuse, a campaign of pure imperial overreach. The expedition was destroyed. 40,000 Athenian soldiers died or were enslaved. The fleet was lost. From that moment, Athens could no longer win the war. It would limp on for another decade. But in 404 before the Common Era, Sparta marched into Athens. The long walls were torn down. The democracy was abolished. A junta of 30 oligarchs installed by Sparta began murdering Athenian intellectuals. Athens never recovered. Not really. It would remain an important cultural center for centuries, but the Golden Age, the explosive moment when one small city was producing more original thought, more original art, more original political theory than the entire rest of the world combined, that moment was dead. The plague had broken its spine, and the war finished it off. And now we come to the part that should haunt you for the rest of your life. 5 years after the plague, in the streets of the broken city, a stonemason's son named Socrates begins to gather young men around him and ask them strange questions. Questions about justice, about virtue, about what it means to live a good life. He is a strange figure, ugly, barefoot, poor, ironic. He writes nothing, but his students will write everything. One of those students is a young aristocrat named Aristocles, nicknamed Plato, the Broad-Shouldered. Plato will found the Academy. He will write the Republic, the Symposium, the Phaedo. He will invent, almost single-handedly, what we now call Western philosophy. One of Plato's students is a young man from Macedon named Aristotle. Aristotle will tutor a boy named Alexander, who will become Alexander the Great. Aristotle will also write the foundations of logic, of biology, of physics, of ethics, of political theory, the framework that will dominate Western thought for the next 2,000 years. This entire civilizational lineage, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Library of Alexandria, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, modern science, modern democracy, all of it is what survived. All of it was salvaged from the wreckage. All of it was the second-rate, post-plague Athens working with what was left. What did we lose? We do not know. That is the horror. We have no way to count what was killed before it could be born. How many young men in their 20s in 430 before the Common Era died choking in their own vomit before they could become the next Socrates? How many young women who could not be philosophers under Athenian law, but who could have shaped culture as Aspasia had shaped Pericles, died unburied in the streets? How many books, half-written, were thrown onto plague pyres? How many ideas were lost in the brains of teachers who died before they could pass them on to a single student? Aeschylus had died of old age 25 years before. But Sophocles was still alive during the plague. He survived. His son Iophan, the playwright, may have died. We are not certain. The historian Herodotus had finished his work just before the plague. But how many other historians, other tragedians, other philosophers, other mathematicians were in their 20s in 430, on the verge of beginning their life's work, and were instead piled into the mass graves at the Kerameikos? We will never know. We cannot know. The plague of Athens did not just kill people, it killed possibilities. It pruned the future of Western civilization in its first true blossoming. Everything we became is what survived this pruning. Everything we did not become is in those mass graves. This is why Mortimer Quill places this jar, this small, faded, 100,000-body jar, at the very top of the cabinet. Because the Black Death killed more people. The Spanish flu killed more people. Smallpox emptied a hemisphere. But none of them killed a future as concentrated, as fragile, as a world historically important as the future that died in Athens in the summer of 430. The Black Death broke feudalism. The plague of Athens broke a civilization at the moment of its conception. It ensured that Sparta of all places, the city of helots and barracks and silence, Sparta would be the model of military discipline that the West would imitate, while Athens, the city of philosophy, would be the lost paradise we would only read about. It changed the balance of every subsequent argument about how human beings should live. Imagine a Western civilization in which the Athenian moment lasted 100 years instead of 50, in which Pericles had lived to 70, in which 100,000 educated young Athenians had become teachers, scientists, writers, statesmen, instead of corpses. We do not have to imagine it as utopia. Athens was a slave society, an imperialist society, a flawed society. But the trajectory of human thought it was producing was something the world has never seen since. That trajectory was amputated by a microbe in a single horrible summer. I set the 11th jar on the table, above all the others. 100,000 dead, a civilization stillborn. Now, look at the table. 11 jars, 11 outbreaks. The Antonine Plague, 5 to 10 million dead. The spine of Rome cracked. The plague of Justinian, 50 million dead. The Roman dream finished. The Black Death, 200 million dead. Feudalism dead. The medieval church mortally wounded. Smallpox in the Americas, 56 million dead. 2 civilizations erased. Kokolisli, 15 million dead. Mexico finished. Cholera, tens of millions dead. Public health invented in response. Russian flu, 1 million dead. The railway pandemic, possibly a coronavirus learning to live with us. Spanish flu, 100 million dead. The forgotten pandemic. HIV/AIDS, 40 million dead. The cruelty of selective indifference exposed. Ebola, 15,000 dead. The warning shot we did not heed. The plague of Athens, 100,000 dead, and a future that never happened. History is not what kings did. History is not what generals planned. History is what microbes decided. Every empire you have ever read about was eventually broken, not by an army, but by an organism so small that ancient minds could not even imagine it existed. Every civilization is one bad summer away from chaos. Every modern city, with its sewers and its hospitals and its pharmaceutical industry, sits on a thin layer of public health infrastructure that was built, every brick of it, in response to a plague. Take the infrastructure away, and the plague comes back. Tomorrow. Now. About that empty test tube I gave you at the beginning of this episode. Look at it. Hold it up to the light. Did you ever stop to wonder why I gave it to you? Did you assume I was going to seal one of the 11 plagues inside it as a souvenir? A historical token to take home? No. The test tube is not for what is in this cabinet. The test tube is for what is not in this cabinet yet. There is one empty shelf all the way at the bottom. I do not know what will go on it. The CDC does not know. The World Health Organization does not know. Some virologist somewhere is studying a bat in a cave in southern China, or a primate in a research center in Central Africa, or a pig farm in Iowa. And when that next pathogen jumps into a human bloodstream, an empty jar will be ready for it. And we will fill it with bodies, and we will fill it with stories, and someone in some archive, in some future, will rank it against the 11 I just showed you. The test tube I gave you is not from the past. It is from the future. Take it home with you. Keep it on a shelf. And remember, the next plague is not a question of if. It is a question of when. That is the lesson of the cabinet. That is the lesson of the 11 jars. Wars kill millions. Microbes kill empires. And the archive? The archive always has room for one more. Next week on Chronoport, episode 12. 12 cities that disappeared overnight, leaving no survivors and no explanation. From the ghost streets of Pompeii to a Soviet town that was wiped from every map in 1979. Some of them died in fire. Some of them died in silence. One of them died of something that, officially, never happened. Subscribe if you want to know which one. The archive is open. Mortimer Quill is your guide. Until next time.